Welcome, guys, to episode 5. We are 2 episodes away from this series being completely over. And in this video, I want to talk about the general manager run up until Missionary 53. I decided that I will talk about AWTP in a separate video. So today, we're just going to cover the few odds and ends. So this may or may not be a shorter video. So let's get started. So this episode, I like to call it Betrayal and Comeback. I don't remember how I have a title, but it's something along those lines because of the heartbreak that I sadly had to go through to get to where I'm at now. And that's wrestling for the first time since Endgame, where I didn't think I'd be able to wrestle, afterwards. But here I am, and I finally did it. So I returned to Missionary 52, and I was offered to be the general manager for PGW. And I wanted it to be very normal. I wanted to come off as just being generic and myself as a person and as a human being. I wanted to be Josh. I wanted to be Josh on camera. I didn't want to be Scorpion. I just wanted to be my personal self and who I am as a person. So there's that. And I returned to ref the Diablo and Malik match, which was a fantastic match. And I was happy to do the honors of being the ref for one of the greatest matches of all time. And personally, I think that's Malik's best match, despite, the matches I would have moving forward with him. Ultimately, that set the tone for how Malik's career would end up turning out to be, becoming the longest-reigning PGW World Champion, the final AWTP World Champion. It set the tone for Malik's career. And it was great to share the reign one last time with Diablo. That was fun, despite, being on camera with him again around Election Day. It was fun to do that. So, there's not really much for me to talk about when it comes to the general manager run, except it was just me, like I said. But we did have some cool storylines when it comes to this whole GM run. And I think we created some pretty unique dynamics with a lot of wrestlers. So on screen, the wrestlers would either love me or they would hate me. And there's a few people that I want to list and kind of talk about some of these little stories that we incorporated into, PGW's season or whatnot. And the first person I'm going to bring up is RJ. So basically at the time, RJ was the world champion. And if my memory serves me right, he didn't like on script. No, I'm not saying this is personal. I'm just talking about in script. So in script, Jay Payne would not be happy with some of the decisions that Scorpion on camera would be making, which would lead to some frustrations and eventually a tease for a possible match. But instead, we get the debut of Jester. So you got that little story going along of how Jay Payne feels when it comes to Scorpion. Another one that I find to be really funny is Akumu. Now, everybody knows how Ed Akumu likes being violent. After all, he's one of our hardest hitters and one of the top guys to, use weapons and all that. And one of the things that I did on camera was ban light tubes. Now, that's actually realistic because we actually did ban light tubes up until Missionary 55. But basically, I deemed it unsafe on camera and talked about how you're not allowed to do headshots on camera. And it's another situation like Jay Payne where instead of Jay Payne being ticked off, now I have a cow that's mad. And basically, Akumi would go after me for the decisions that I made in regards to taking care of our safety and well-being of our wrestlers. And ultimately, my favorite storyline out of this, and I think the biggest person that I feel benefited this is obviously Big Rig. Biggest, big, get it? But no, Christian really benefited from this story. And it all has to do with his character. And all Christian had to do was, again, in my opinion, Christian, after 8 years, was able to win the world title because of this storyline. And not only this storyline, but the work that he's put in throughout the years from CWA up to PGW. And you can see his character arc and how funny he could be on camera, and talk about how his titties are sweating and how I have to pay him money to wrestle, and how Big Rig would refuse to wrestle if he wasn't paid. And that's another reason why in script people like Jay Payne and Malik were not happy with Scorpion, because Scorpion was relying on the old guard by paying these wrestlers to wrestle, whereas these guys are putting their bodies on the line, and essentially they're being paid nothing, but overall are still enjoying the love that is professional wrestling in their hearts and minds. And they loved it, but not obviously the other wrestlers, but Christian actually loved it, as I should mention. So those were some cool storylines, along with some few odds and ends with Beerus on camera, and him and being his GOAT character form or whatnot, and having to, you know, pony up to Beerus, which ultimately we would get to that pretty soon. So those are some pretty cool things that we did when it came to a lot of these stories. And it was cool because it felt like it was the first time we actually had a legitimate general manager role. You would see me on screen constantly. We never had that with other GMs. Like, we had a arc with Akumu at one point, I believe, where he was the general manager, but nothing came out of it. You've had, you know, CEO ideas, which that's probably the closest storyline that we got in terms of a character arc that has authority, would be Chris Reckless during his CEO run. Besides that, we never really had much of a character who was like a GM on screen. And I think this was very unique for some more storytelling and some cool script ideas and videos, like the video where I have to pick up Christian, or do some, you know, segments with Christian and Austin Malik, and, you know, those two butting heads. That was really hilarious. And then some stuff with Medusa at the time, with her being the co-general manager, which that was only done because there was nothing for her to do on screen. And, you know, the few odds and ends, you know, with Scorpion, you know, a somewhat PTSD type of thing where he's afraid of Leatherface despite him being attacked by Leatherface at Missionary 52. And, you know, him running off from Leatherface in some segments after Missionary 52. So there was some cool little stuff that we could do when it came to this whole general manager stuff. And then you have this random theme of mine called Animal by Def Leppard. Def Leppard is one of my favorite bands. I don't listen to them often right now, compared to back in 2022, but they had some pretty cool bangers. And it was just, you know, again, a song that's myself basically as Josh. I didn't think, you know, if it's me being normal on screen, I didn't think it should be this heavy rock metal type of theme, how every other wrestler uses their theme songs. I think this one should have been the complete opposite of it, where you're basically just getting some generic form of me as a general manager. So overall, I think this whole general manager run was a success, and I think it was a very unique story, and it's honestly one of my most underrated runs because it was something different that we've never seen on camera before. So overall, I enjoyed this whole GM run. But then we get to this cool idea that I had, and I pitched it to Steven, and it was called the Diablo Memorial Roulette Tournament. I talked to him about a few matches that we never did on screen, for example, in years. And I had this idea of what if I do this wheel that I make on, you know, the phone or whatnot, and turn it into a spinner, and whatever it lands on, that's the match we do. So basically what I did was I did that, and whatever match it landed on, so basically how this worked, whatever match it landed on, that was the match that would occur. So we kind of decided, and, you know, me and Steven or whatnot, of how should this bracket be to make this tournament a success. Because this was the biggest tournament in PGW history in terms of build, in terms of the matches, in terms of the hype. I mean, you never really had that with, like, the one quarter tournament back in CWA. You never had that with many other tournaments. And the Mount Rushmore tournament, for example, was a forced opinion, in my opinion. Despite all four wrestlers being deserving, this one had the build for a huge match deal or whatnot. I know that didn't really make sense, but basically, all matches were a big deal because this was huge. This was a huge tournament. And then you have, some buys in there, Scorpion ponying up to Beers, being like, oh, you beat Diablo, you get a buy. All right, Christian, you get a buy too, all this kind of stuff. And it drives some of these other wrestlers crazy in script. And basically, we determined, Steven and I, off screen of the matchups because we didn't want to do like a matchup that would suck. And of the 4 or 5 matches, for example, that were landed on, out of the ideas of which matches will be for which round, we decided, in terms of the match types, of which match type would fit best for each of these matches, because we didn't want, any match to suck based on who was wrestling the match. So overall, I thought this tournament was a success. It gave you a huge shocker at the end, which has me turning heel. So ultimately, Scorpion turns heel on Malik. And basically, he ponies up to Beers again because Scorpion, all he wants at this point is power. And to have that power, you have to go after the guy that's been using you for all these years in script. And that's Beers. But now you have the authority to do whatever you want. And also, the plan was to do this because I wanted the match with Malik. So the idea of me versus Malik was heavily discussed once he, came into PGW. And we wanted to wait on it for a little bit. And basically, it can't be face versus face, in my opinion, because that's boring. It has to be face versus heel. And in this situation, it was appropriate for Malik to be the face where I was the heel. And obviously, I've said this over the years, I've always hated the idea of a heel versus a heel, because ultimately one of the heels gets hurt at the end of the match or whatnot in terms of momentum and, all that kind of stuff. So basically, I turn on Malik, Beers wins the world title, and this is supposed to set up me versus Malik for March. And the planned idea was going to be me versus Malik for the Warriors title, where Malik retains the title. But there's a roadblock along the way. And unfortunately, there was 2 situations with Malik where he collapsed his lung. I don't know how this happened. It's unfortunate that it happened because we already started the build for me and Malik. So now you have to kind of shoehorn, because I still wanted to wrestle. How can we get around this? And there was a brief idea in mind of having me face Malik briefly in like 2 seconds with Zero Assault causing a disqualification when I was district champion, but it just did not end up happening. Because Malik had a hard time moving, if I remember correctly, so we just didn't do the idea. But the district title, on the other hand, was my idea. So ultimately, Steven and I knew who the opponent had to be, if not Malik, and that was Shane again, Zero Assault, because he was probably the best wrestler at the time, and honestly, he would be able to carry me through this match. So we end up having a little match between him and I just so we could get the Warriors title on me. I'm sorry, not the Warriors, the district title on me. Boy, I do wish I could have won the Warriors title. But the district title, I end up beating Shane for by BS. And now I'm self-proclaiming myself to being the CEO, and I win the district title. Ultimately, Christian moves on from, the whole Atonement thing. And basically, the Atonement reformed after the heel turn. So it consists of basically of me, Joe, and Steven. Because again, Joe and I, which I've never talked about during our endgame run, we had a random but good chemistry, Mysterio and I. And I liked that. And some of our matches were okay and good. But our chemistry was very random and very well, I'd say pretty good. So that happened. So I win the district title, and ultimately we do the match with Shane, and I drop the belt immediately back to Shane, and we also had the Gateway title on the line, which I never understood that, and I still don't understand it to this day, because I thought the stipulation of the Gateway title when it first came in was no former world champion could ever fight for the title. But the way around it was to have my CEO powers to use my authority and use my advantages to fight for the Gateway title, and to take something away that Zero Assault holds dearly to his heart. So it was essentially a reunification match because Jester no longer being around. So ultimately, Steven sees this, I think, as our best match, but I see it as our second best behind the one from June of 21 from Endgame, where I dropped the HFW World title. But this match was really good. The storytelling was there. Shane helped me through the match. He helped carry me through the match. I mean, again, I had a good showing, but ultimately, Zero Assault basically had me put in the offense, and then ultimately he knew he had to put me down. So he basically waited at a certain moment to put Scorpion down for good. And ultimately, at that point, Scorpion's career is over in terms of in-ring competition. So I'm in script fired because I don't want to compete with Zero Assault again for the district title. So then Malik, I think, becomes the GM or something from this whole contract thing, which I'm not an expert when it comes to this whole story, where supposedly I signed up on a contract, but then there was a stipulation where if something were to happen, and Malik or something would be the new GM because Diablo basically gave Scorpion the contract to become, the general manager and all this stuff. So I don't remember the specifics from this whole story. That's something that Steven may have to explain in the comment section. So if he hears this, he'll definitely do that, I think. But basically, that's what happened here. And this whole thing with Malik, I wanted to point this out. I was feeling my confidence again. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to wrestle Malik. But even though the match didn't happen, I think the match with Shane, even though it happened with Shane, I think that match was way better than I think what the match would have been if it was with Malik. But regardless of Malik or Zero Assault, I got my confidence back as a wrestler, and basically this would lead the way to a WTP season where I eventually win the PGW World Heavyweight Championship. So that made me happy because, again, when I mentioned that Zero Assault helped me through this match, he really did. And another thing that I think is really important for this match, along with the rest of my run in AWTP, is the storytelling. The storytelling saved me for every other match post-Endgame, because I knew I didn't really have it like I used to, because I wanted to be precautious, if that's even a word. I wanted to be more cautious. Okay, that's a better word. I wanted to be more cautious with how I wrestled. So we used my back as a way to kind of sell, but I sold it a bit more in AWTP, but not really much in the PGW run with the two matches with Shane. But there was some good storytelling in these matches or whatnot, and it showed that I can still go despite my flaws post-Endgame, and using that to my advantage with the storytelling, because I love storytelling when it comes to wrestling. And we get a lot of our storytelling, as you guys know, from the whole Bloodline angle. And I think the Bloodline angle in WWE had a major influence on storylines moving forward back in late PGW or whatnot, because it came more about storytelling than it was match quality. We knew the matches were going to be good, but the more important thing is the storytelling. You want the characters to be invested. You want the fans to be invested in these characters. And we learned a lot from this whole Bloodline stuff with Roman Reigns, the Tribal Chief, and, the Usos, Sami Zayn, and, Paul Heyman. Like, we were inspired by the Bloodline saga. A lot of people don't realize this. And ultimately, Missionary 53, we do a thing where I threatened to sue Malik and PGW or whatnot for tampering with the contract, which leads to a segment at my house where I sign a contract because Malik makes me realize that Beers has been manipulating me for the past 8 years, which ultimately this leads into Scorpion apologizing to Malik, because Malik knew this wasn't the Scorpion that he wanted, and he knew that Scorpion wanted what was free. He wanted free from all this pain, and he was basically a shell of himself from Beers, because Beers did a lot when it came to bringing him back on screen. The flaws that happened from like the whole Billy and Bailey drama dating back to Missionary 30, the whole Missionary 40 run and script was because of Beers. Beers wanted to do everything he could to either control Scorpion as a character or use him, because ultimately the only person who would benefit out of this would be Steven or Beers or whatnot in this situation. And ultimately, that's something else I'm having an issue with. I gotta stop saying ultimately, but eventually this whole story arc of my 10-year run almost was off of one person, and that is Beers. And that's where we get to when it comes to Missionary 54. So, overall, this whole CEO run and the GM run, very odd run and very unique, with a memorable match in there. And at the time, I was very satisfied. And if this was the end of my run or career, I would have been satisfied because it's one of my best matches of all time. So, there was one other thing that I want to talk about because it's going to be like a bitch fest from how I used to do this back in the day. But there was something that I want to do because I think I have a lot to say when it comes to a specific person. I've kind of been hyping it up in a few episodes now. You know, back then, you know, when I have hatred for, you know, a lot of people and all that stuff. Though, you know, you could make amends with other people like Daniel, where, again, what I mentioned before, I don't like Daniel as a person from all the stuff that happened with my dad, but we're still mutual, and I could see that we've grown up, you know, and I've seen him grow, for example. And I can still talk to Daniel, and I've mentioned before, there's way other people that are way worse, and that's who I'm going to talk about next. I'm going to pause this to kind of get my thoughts together because, in my mind, it's going to be a shoot. It's going to be like a CWA shoot because this person did a lot of harm, in my opinion, towards me and a lot of other people. And this is one of the reasons why she is no longer around on the channel. It's never been discussed. I did bring it up briefly in our story time with Beers as it was a personal issue as to why this person left PGW. But anyways, this whole shoot that I'm about to do, it's probably going to bite me in the ass and someone's probably going to say something, but I'm going to get it off my chest anyway because honestly, I've been holding this in for a long time. So I'm going to pause this, kind of get my thoughts together, and we will talk about it. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Emma here today. AKA, for anybody who doesn't know who Emma is, she came by the name of Medusa and was one of the females on screen as, you know, my manager for many years between 2020 during the HFW season up until Endgame and a few odds and ends during, you know, Missionary 52 and so on. But all I got to say is this. She fell off so much harder than the makeup that she has on her face. This is how bad Medusa did to me. She did a lot of people dirty, especially me. So here's why Emma left PGW as Medusa or whatnot. And it's unfortunate, again, this happened. But again, this was her choice. And there is nobody to blame but herself for the situation. So back after Endgame, sometime a few months after Endgame, she broke up with that one guy that I mentioned of why I was unhappy during the beginning of the PGW run, which kind of resulted in a lot of issues with the whole Leatherface and the cryptic stuff that happened and how I kind of viewed all that. So she broke up with him months after Endgame, but unfortunately sometime before, or a little bit before the end of the Memorial Tournament, of the Diablo Tournament, she got back with him. And I was very suspicious because during the one day during my finals week, she made the biggest mistake of her life of sharing me her Snapchat location. And I caught that at the guy's house. Or that's where I saw where her location was. And I messaged Steven in the bathroom during my finals week up at college. And I'm like, why is she down there? And he told me something that he had no idea, Steven or whatnot. And basically, okay, I messaged Emma about it. And she's like, oh, we're friends, him and I still. We just don't. You know, we don't think about each other, we're just friends. And turned out she basically pulled the same crap that she did previously about getting with him. And that was why I was unhappy during the first, you know, time around when they were together. And basically, she threw everything away, Emma. She threw all of us away when it came to all of her friends in the group. And I know there's a few people that I won't name out of respect for everybody on the roster, but there are a few people still on the roster, for example, that still talk to her, which honestly, why? But I'm not going to name drop people when it comes to that. But it's an absolute disgrace that I wasted all these years for some two-faced pipsqueak. She did a lot of nasty things to me when I look back at it. And Steven and I were talking about this the one day, and how if she was unhappy with me, she would literally tell Steven and not say it to my face. Like, if you're going to be a true friend, you're going to tell me and we're going to work through this together. Not this two-faced bitch shit. And that happened on a few instances where one time I reconciled with another, female friend. And what did she do? She talked behind my back instead of telling me to my face. I mean, she has no room to talk about this shit. And it sucks that she would pull this stuff. And especially the whole neck shoot thing where I mentioned how I believed he did all that because he was trying to teach me a lesson and how Emma may have gone to his head. I still see that, but I think she talked a lot behind other people's backs and all that stuff and wasn't an honest person. She was very lonely. She's a lonely person that is only in it for pleasure, which is absolutely disgusting. And she fears being alone because why would you break up with him after getting engaged, believe it or not? She got engaged to this guy 2 months in for the third time being back together. It was made fun of. And literally, he broke up with her, and all of a sudden, she had a bounce back since then, which, again, shows who she really is as a person. All she cares is someone that wants a boyfriend. She used everybody in PGW just to have a boyfriend. That's the only reason why she was on camera. She did not care about being friends. She did not care about being on camera. She only cared about the, you know what I'm talking about. And what happened was Emma's departure happened because she randomly called Steven randomly on a day at 3 o'clock in the morning and said that Steven was a narcissist and how she doesn't want to be friends with him anymore, and the boyfriend in the background is clearly drunk as fuck. I message Emma and I say, look, I don't care what happened. I still care about you and all this stuff that I want to make this work. She said that I still care about you too and all that stuff, but it turned out she didn't because she told me some lies. And here are the lies. So, long story short, she tells me he has COVID, so she can't see him. What do I see on Snapchat like 2 or 3 days later? They're together with a friend. And that's basically when I not snapped at her, I basically abruptly dropped her. And that proved to me that she was lying to me again. I dropped her, and then all of a sudden she's going around spreading all these lies. I found out through Steven that she told Chippy that I needed to be medicated for what I did. And I'm sorry, but that's just uncalled for, and how I'm fucked up for being autistic and need to go on medications, whereas she needs that she's not fucked up and doesn't need to go on medications. I mean, the way you act, girl, it's a shame that your parents raised you this way, because clearly it shows that your parents did not raise you properly. And again, it sucks because I loved her mom, despite those flaws, and it absolutely sucks. I was heartbroken. I actually had to go and get therapy as a result for this, because out of my energy and my time and my effort that she would pull this shit on me after everything that I've done to her, I've never seen a toxic bitch in my life worse than her. And it's unfortunate that she was part of my life for 3 years just to throw me to a curve, because all she had in her head was she wants a fucked up individual of a boyfriend, because she has nothing else in life, because she can't get any friends, because all she cares about is getting her, you know what sucked and other odds and ends. A lot of people told me back in the day, and I always thought these were rumors, that she would do a lot of nasty things like nudes and, sucking dicks and, all this kind of stuff. Sounds to be right, and supposedly she got into drugs sometime after her departure, and basically her rant on Steven, which Steven didn't deserve that. He did nothing wrong in this situation looking back. She just wanted out of that situation because the guy told him to, or told her to. So basically, she did this to herself. I've never seen her, like I said, have this fast of a downfall. I've never seen this downfall from anybody. Like I mentioned, she her downfall was way faster than the makeup that melts off her face. And all she cared about was being desperate for love, and eventually that bit her in the ass. Nobody wanted to speak to her again on screen, on camera, besides maybe like 1 or 2 other individuals still. But overall, she wasted my time. I thought she was my friend. Clearly, she wasn't. I still wish that we could have worked through this, but she made the decision to do all these stupid things and make these poor decisions, and now she's driving a soccer mom van that's beat up, and that's a huge dip in terms of what car she was driving previously, which, why the hell would you throw stickers on your car like that? Like, my God, you're asking for more money to spend to kind of get those off. So my guess is she totaled that vehicle because that's all she does is crash, just like how she likes to crash her life on multiple occasions. And I saw her recently up at this one shopping plaza. I saw her and she literally like walked away because she knows she did wrong and there's no coming back from this. So I'm just going to end it like this. All I'm going to say is I don't want her in my life anymore. She did a lot of damage to me that it took me a really long time to recover, and I don't want to see that piece of shit in my life ever again. And that involves everybody else on the roster. We don't want to see that piece of shit ever again, because she used me for 3 years just because of all this. And throughout those 3 years, I've learned after all this, that she was talking behind my back regardless of the 3 years. And it hurts. You don't do that to your best friend. This was actually not as bad as I thought it was going to go when it comes to the shoot, but basically the reason why Medusa was gone from PGW was because she got with the guy from the same relationship or whatnot and eventually turned on everybody instead of the first time, where she chose us the first time. The second time, she chose him. And from choosing him, basically showed her true colors. That all she cared about was a relationship. Because she has nothing else in life but a man, because she fears being alone. And look at me. I just broke up with my girlfriend. I'm not being desperate for a relationship. Like, it's sad. The downfall of Emma is sad. So I'm just going to leave it at that. That Medusa basically was kicked out from the group because of how she acted when it came to all these relationships. And eventually, basically, she forced herself out. So that's my little shoot on Emma. And so abruptly, we had to write her off script. And then now I want to talk about why she's not really in videos in terms of, video edits and all that. Basically, we wanted to erase her from PGW history because she has no business being on screen or being a part of our history. And again, it is a shame that she is involved with a few years of my career, but that's what happened. She was somewhat erased from our history. Yoo-hoo! I think my laptop just died. Let's see here. Yeah. The last thing I wanted to point out was I was a mess before, which I mentioned. Like, I had to go get therapy. Took me a long time to recover because I really thought, again, she was a friend. But she was clearly a fake bitch. So that's the whole reason why the whole Medusa departure happened. And that's why she no longer associates with all of us. Because, again, she's a bitch. So I'm done ranting. Let's get to the good stuff. So the next episode is going to be the last episode of the series where I will talk about the AWTP run. And literally, it was very unique. Again, the storytelling saved my matches, along with me winning the PGW World Heavyweight Championship finally, getting to main event my 10th Missionary, which only a few people have ever done, along with actually being able to wrestle Malik twice, and my career with Malik, along with wrestling Jester, which was not supposed to happen. Excuse me. The match with JJ was not supposed to happen. So you got 4 more matches coming for me, and then a segment with Akumu and, you know, some other odds and ends. So I'm going to go into depth about some of that and how I feel about some of the things. And now with us being ended, it's cool to go back and kind of relive the stuff one more time. So thank you guys for watching, and appreciate you listening to my little rant. And can't wait to see you guys in the last episode of this series. It's been really fun talking about all these things, whether it was bad or good, like the whole Emma thing, which was bad. But there's a lot of good when it comes to how my run ended and being able to wrestle a guy that I've wanted to wrestle since Missionary 52, and that is Malik. So thank you guys for watching. Take care, and I will see you guys in the last episode. See you guys.